Jeremy, welcome aboard to the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Ari. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you.
So let's start with something that at least I thought was a little crazy, but you'll probably convince us that it's not. You are the president of the U.S. Free Diving Federation. Okay,
Yes.
let's start with something simple because I had no idea what this was, but it's really cool. What is free diving?
Well, free diving is unlike scuba diving, where you have a tank on your back. Free diving is completely free of a scuba tank. So it's solely reliant on you and your ability to hold breath and dive either into the depth or long lengthwise in the pool.
And you can't go very deep free diving, right?
It depends on how you define deep, right? Um,
So very shallow, just a few meters.
Yeah, of course. If you want to consider 140 meters fairly shallow, yeah, sure, you can't go
Okay,
dive
this
deep.
shocked me, right? 140 meters. That is pretty badass. So for those of you who know what atmospheres is, that's about 14, 15 atmospheres. 140 meters is for our American audience. What is that in feet? Do you know the offhand?
140 times three, so that's 420 feet down. So it's 840 feet round trip.
Yeah. So that is crazy. That is crazy. So it's about 450 just going down, 459
Mhm.
actually. So that is crazy. How do you even dive so deep with just your lungs, basically nothing else?
Well, for complete transparency, I do not dive 140 meters. That's a number I threw out because a good friend of mine named Alexei Molchanov,
Hmm.
he is the deepest male free diver in the world right now, and he's diving around 140 meters. But your question is, how can you dive that deep? It's a there's a physiological process that happens within the body, and it's a chain reaction of things, which I can't get into very scientifically. But the short answer I will give you is that it's mind over matter. Anybody can effectively do it. You're physically capable of doing it, but allowing ourselves to train over time. And then where the training starts really is in the mind. That's the first place.
So this is incredibly interesting. What's the let's say the psychological barrier that you need to overcome? What's that moment where you're like, "Oh, I can't do it." What does that feel like? When does it happen?
Well, at any moment, really, and really, what happens, what you experience in the water is what you experience on land.
Hmm.
You have the same fears. Nothing changes from from land to water, but it only gets more, amplified in the water. So imagine, you're trying free diving for the first or second time, and yeah, you go down 5 feet, and then all of a sudden you think, oh my God, I got to go back up. I got to go back up, and you go back up. It's that fear of death, of not having enough breath. I can't do it. These self-limiting beliefs of I can't do this, I can't do that. That's really the first thing that you're going to encounter is like, I can't do that. And it's the same thing you encounter on land when you're doing things. I can't do that. So that's the first barrier that you really have to break through. And this is why when you start free diving, you go little by little. You go 5 feet. Oh, I can do that. And you go back up. I did five. Oh, I can go to seven. Oh, I can do 7 feet. I go back up 10 feet. So it's a very slow incremental process of reinforcing in oneself that you can actually do it.
I mean, this is great advice. I will state as a side note for anything you do, right? You kind of edge yourself closer and closer to the edges of your ability to kind of figure out that you can do a lot more than what you think. So there's something brilliant, I think, in that as a general experience. Did you feel that this experience has changed you in any way?
Oh man, that's a really good question. I've been a competitive swimmer earlier in my life, so I was always comfortable with water and I always liked to be in the ocean environment. But when I started free diving in 2017 off the island of Amorgos in Greece, um, it was just a new and different experience. Of course, I've always snorkeled down a little bit, to 10, 13, 14 feet, the depth of a deep well in a swimming pool. But once I actually was able to achieve much greater depths than that, I started to realize like we are so much more capable than we believe that we are or that we want to believe. And it's opportunities like free diving and other sports, when you do push your limits, you start to understand that. And that's what really changed for me. It was that I realized I'm more powerful than I realized that I am in controlling the mind and allowing myself opportunity to extend those edges. So it really put me in that position of giving me agency, or help me understand that I have agency over my mind, and what really happens there.
I- do you think there's something either broken in our kind of broader educational system in the United States and maybe in the world? I don't know. And maybe in how we parent children. Is there a lesson in here that has kind of even broader perspective, in your opinion? Is this something you, and remember, the audience knows that there's no prepared questions here. Everything here is
Yeah.
just like wherever. So, take a minute to kind of think through that. And what do you think?
Oh, it's hard for me to really comment on the school system. I don't have children. My only experience with school is from when I was in school, many moons ago. But what I've come to understand and what I've experienced and have seen through
And
others.
I'll
Mhm.
rephrase the question also to,
Yeah.
let's say, the corporate environment as well. So
Mhm.
any kind of, let's say, systematic environments that we have in America today.
Mhm. Yeah, and I appreciate that, Ari. And the one thing I was going to say is that really short story, real short. I was at a store. I was at a GameStop years ago, and this one child was I want this game, I want this game, and I want this game to the mom. And the mom said to the person behind the counter, "Oh, should I get this for my child?" Then the person behind the counter said, "Look, I'm a lot older than he is, and I can't do it, so he's not going to be able to do it." And
That's
so the mom reflected to the child, "I'm not going to buy that for you because he can't do it, so you won't be able to do it." So, kind of to your point, what I experienced in that moment was that we are capable of doing so much more than we are even aware of. But so many times, our capability is prevented or inhibited by the projections that others have of themselves. Just because they say they can't do it, and they project that onto a child or another person, then another person picks up and adopts that same mindset. So really, it is the constructs of society, and how we have interoperated in the things that we have brought through lineage and generations, and how we were all raised, right?
yeah.
So we're all mere projections of the experiences that we had as we were growing up, albeit from the parents or from the school or from a work environment. This is exactly what happens, unfortunately.
Yeah.
That was my
I
experience. Yes.
I I resonate with that deeply, and the reason I hooked onto that is because you mentioned limiting beliefs.
Mhm.
Um, I feel that this is true in the work environment. Um, I, I met the most amazing graphics designer, right? Um, and yeah, I'm kind of listening to him, and he's saying like he's trying to solve basically an entity relationship diagram data modeling problem. And I listened to him and I'm like, this guy is brilliant. He doesn't he's a graphics, a UX, engineer. He's not a software engineer. He kind of figured out that there's a problem that he's never studied, he's never learned, and he was trying to wrap his head around this, but he never learned how to do ER modeling. And I was like, this is brilliant. Like he's trying to solve something incredibly difficult. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to teach you what an ER diagram is. 15 minutes,
Mm.
I showed him what ER diagrams were, right? A little bit of computer science there for him. He caught it so quickly. And he just ran with it. And, the weeks go by and I see what he's doing. And I was just blown away. And what really upset me is that kind of nobody else saw his brilliance, and nobody else kind of recognized that no, you're not just a graphics designer, you are a human being and you have capabilities. I don't know what your capabilities are, you don't know what your capabilities are, unfortunately, in many cases. And people, you have your own limiting beliefs, and until somebody kind of, I don't know if there's a better way to say this, kind of gives you permission to fail
Yeah.
and to
Yeah.
try to do more, then people just don't, because you have this tag, this label. Oh, I'm just a UX guy or whatever. That was incredibly both frustrating and amazing at the same time to see that paradigm. Um, do you see the same thing happening with entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I do. And you know, you and I met at Techstars, and the thing I love about the Techstars program actually is the mentorship model that they have attached to the accelerator, because that is such a hugely important aspect of Techstars. Because these startup founders, these first, likely in most cases, first time founders, they've latched onto a problem that they want to solve in a particular industry, and they're only able to push things as far as their understanding or their capabilities that they have developed to this point in their life.
Yeah.
So having that mentor there, or mentors, whatever, you know, surrounds them in that time period, really giving them the guidance, kind of like what you did with that designer, of giving them guidance and opportunity to expand, to push those edges, to learn another perspective or hear another point of view around something. It's giving them, you know, it's helping them to expand and flower, really. You know, so I do see that in the corporate environment in a lot of ways.
Is there any kind of, memorable story about a founder that you kind of saw him or her unlock capabilities that they didn't even believe that they had, that they didn't want to do something because they didn't think they were capable, and you're like, I think you can do this. Does any story come to mind?
Yeah, I had joined a startup as the chief revenue officer. Um, oh gosh, in 2017, 18. And, you know, in working with the founder, you know, he was always so fearful of walking in front of a room, either to make a presentation to potential customer or even the board of directors.
Yeah.
And, you know, he had left Stanford early, didn't graduate. So he had this belief about himself that he wasn't good enough, and he doesn't know how to speak to people or connect with people. He hadn't made presentations in college because he left early, but he was this brilliant mind that had this concept, that had all the wherewithal necessary to kind of bring this concept to market, but was just limiting himself and holding himself back to really shine in, you know, in the moments that he needed to as a founder. You know, so, you know, he and I had worked together and had done a lot of one-on-one together, back and forth, and reflection, or reflecting and mirroring, to really support him in feeling comfortable of being a human, making mistakes, you know, and just learning how to just speak to others in a genuine and authentic way, as opposed to standing there to perform.
Yes.
Once he took that performance aspect out of his mindset, then he started to feel more comfortable, and his presentations were more conversational, as opposed to these contrived, you know, scripted things that he felt like he needed to say to elicit or achieve this from them or get some reaction from them. It's like, no, it is what it is. Present it the way that it is, and communicate to them as you would want to be communicated yourself.
Yeah.
You know, so that was really, it was really a beautiful moment, quite frankly, in watching him blossom, in the next presentations, as we went down around to the university campuses and met with,
Wonderful.
you know, some of the groups, the CIO groups, and others.
I- That's such a weird thing, right? We kind of think that the easy right path is to put on this show and to be super rehearsed and to know all the answers to the questions and to kind of not have ambiguity. But the surprising answer is it's the other way around. Like, sure, you got to know your stuff. Absolutely. Like, you can't come in unprepared. Always come prepared. But once you're prepared, actually, I would argue taking the path of starting a really good conversation is incredibly smart strategy from a sales perspective. Now, would you agree? And what's your perspective? Like, you come into a meeting, what are you trying to do with the clients? And you've got a really nice sales background and capability.
Mhm.
What's the approach from your kind of sales, let's say, philosophy?
You know, my approach has always been consultative, in a way that that I'm there to help them. I'm there to support them. I'm there to help them solve a problem, right? Because at the end of the day, you're building a relationship with somebody else, and they have a problem that they're looking to solve. whatever their role is. And as long as you can connect with them on a human level and relate to them and understand what that problem is and come back to them genuinely with something that works for them, there you solve the problem. That's the sale right there. It's not forcing or trying to push them on something and not learning about them. There's so many times I've seen folks in a sales role where they're just trying to achieve a number
Yeah.
and they're forgetting about the human connection. They're forgetting about why they're in that role and they're there to serve that customer. That's why that's why a lot of businesses exist. And if they didn't have that customer, they don't have a business.
Yeah.
So take the time to understand who you're connecting with and what are they looking to achieve and help them solve that.
There's two incredibly powerful things that you're talking about. One is a real human connection. The other one is, are you actually solving a problem? And I see so many salespeople come into a sales environment, do the discovery questions, completely ignore the answers, and then start the demo.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know. I'm kind of speechless when I see this happen. What do you do when you see that?
Well, I've seen that a number of times, and what's happening, there's a disconnect. That person doesn't know how to connect with another person. They believe that their role is just there to be transactional. So that's why I use the word consultative and not transactional. Transactional is just to turn a number, turn a dollar, and you're not being relational in that experience. So, I've not really ever been on the side of a customer. So sitting on the side of leading sales or head of sales, when I see that, I just let that person kind of go through that experience that they're the way they're presenting it, and there's time afterwards to reflect with them, and then they'll usually say, how do you think that went? I said, well, how do you think that went?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't feel like I really connected with them. I'm not sure they really got it. And I'm like, well, I agree with you. And let's talk about why.
Right.
Right. So, during the sales presentation itself, I don't really ever step in because then when you're stepping in, it's causing that salesperson to then be reliant or
Right.
codependent on you
Right.
to really like pick up where they're missing or where they have gaps. So,
Yeah.
so there's time for reflection afterwards.
I would argue that it's better to make a mistake and learn from it than to be basically diminished by, shoved aside.
Yeah.
Because I've seen situations that I thought were going poorly, and they were, but then, I'll just use his name, Alden. He just turned it around. Like he kind of
Yeah.
like took a moment to reflect and was like, this is going poorly. And you could kind of see his brain like stopping and thinking. And then I saw the pivot. I'm like, holy shit, that was brilliant. And if I would have stepped in, he would not have pivoted. He would not have gone in that other direction. He would have not have been like, oh, what should I do now? He would have not have had that lesson learned. And even if he made that mistake, I think it would have been much more powerful for him to make the mistake and talk with me about it later than for me to swoop in and kind of diminish him as a person by taking over. So I love that feedback. That's brilliant. Alvin, by the way, was a software developer, and he became a sales guy, and he was my top sales guy that year.
Which is not common
It
because
is
you're
not common.
using
No,
different sides of your brain being an
different
engineer
sides.
versus sales,
Yeah.
right?
He told me he doesn't want to be a sales guy because it was sleazy. And I was like, why don't we try?
We froze a little bit there.
Yeah, that's okay. We'll just pick up right from where we were. I'll cut it
You
out in
said
editing.
sleazy.
Yeah.
That's the last thing I heard. Sleazy.
So Alden's perception was that sales was sleazy. It was car salesmen, snake oil, all that basically salespeople lied. And I was like, okay, let's learn what sales actually means. And it's really about building relationships, like you said.
Yeah.
And from a complete anti, I don't want to do this, to, well, do you give me permission to do an experiment together with you to like best sales guy. This is beautiful, just beautiful.
Amazing.
Like he didn't believe he can do it. He didn't want to do it, and he was just awesome. That's I think it's
See,
beautiful.
no, that's the thing. It's about the belief, right? In life and anything, if you don't believe something, you will not achieve it, right? So everything is mental. You have that thought, you create that belief, and then things just start to unfold as a result.
What? So we're gonna go down a weird bunny hole, rabbit hole now.
Hmm.
Weird to some people, wonderful to others. What if you just can't change your mental model? What if you're just stuck?
What if you can't change it? Well, then therein lies the exploration, right? Why am I stuck? What beliefs or what patterns am I working from in the past? What are the origin points of these patterns that are causing me to feel like I am stuck? That's where you've got to go into some deep exploration around that, and that's could be, one-on-one with a business coach. It could be a therapist. It could be somebody like that. Because if that is such a strong block, and you're not understanding that origin, and you then are not able to change it, that could impact you in your work and life environment, to varying degrees.
And this is I'll put a warning here that taking a reflective self-awareness journey can be dangerous because you don't always love what you find out, and change is hard. So anybody listening to us, at this point, I would say, careful what you ask for. But what does this journey look like? So you're coaching an entrepreneur. They figure out that they're stuck. What do you advise them to do?
You know, that's an interesting question because, as a coach, you're not necessarily there to advise them or tell them what to do.
Mm,
You're there to reflect back to them and operate as a mirror.
mm,
Well, why are you stuck?
right.
And so as you're reflecting back, what you keep doing is you're asking questions. You're leading with curiosity in the conversation, and you're hoping that the conversation is such that it helps them to kind of navigate themselves to arrive at an aha moment of, oh, I know why I'm stuck. It's because of this moment I was told this, and I created this transparent belief at that moment in time, which I've still been living through.
Right.
And, part of the coach or a guide is the responsibility is to help reflect in mirrors, to give them an opportunity to have their own self-exploration, you know, not a therapist, not a PhD or anything of that sort, where they have a whole different level of skill set on helping to navigate those, because maybe that's associated with some deeply rooted trauma that they had packed away, right? So if they discover it's something attached to that, well, then it's like, it's time to go see a therapist to work through that process. So, but really, it's leading with curiosity and mirroring to them to help them kind of, find that thread and pull the thread themselves into self-discover around that.
Yeah.
And then obviously, if there's some moments where you can provide advice, well, maybe you might want to consider this, or and there's always an invitation. It's not a directive or you should, or it's always with an invitation of something to consider, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We had a Jeremy and I were at a lecture, I think it was Brad Feld, and it was like, you should, with the finger,
Yes,
his
I
dad.
remember that.
Next
Yeah.
time I talk to Brad Feld, I'm gonna be like, this is a win-win-win-win-win situation. There's only two of us here, but all five of us are getting value. A little inside joke there. Okay, so there is another side to your business,
Hmm.
business coaching and psychedelic facilitator.
Yeah.
Tell us about that second half.
Oh, well, that second half, it's an interesting one. Um, 3 years ago, I was working 3 years ago, I was working with a company, a tech company, and I've been starting to notice patterns of of my exhaustion in a sales role over multiple companies,
Mm,
but as I'm getting older, I'm getting wiser, and I started to see these patterns, and I got to a point where, um, I felt like I needed some additional support outside of this work environment to really explore what was going on, and I sat with a therapist of mine
Mm,
at that time, and we were having a conversation, and I had expressed to her that I'm feeling exhausted. I feel like I'm in a chaotic environment. I feel like I'm just not sure. It's like I'm experiencing burnout. And so she said, "Look, I'd like to invite you to consider experiencing psilocybin or
mm,
magic mushroom."
mm,
Oh, at first I was like, "Oh God, you got to be crazy. There's no way I'm doing this." And this is coming from a mindset of I always needed to be in control. So I
mm.
was like, I'm going to go into this experience that I have no idea what's going to happen and I can't control it. She's
Right.
like, "Yeah, you're not going to be able to control anything." I said, "I'm not so sure about that." And she looked at me, she said, "Honey, if you if this is so important to you and you want to work through these patterns,
Mm,
you're going to do this. And
mm.
I know you'll do this."
Beautiful.
And I kind of just sat back for a minute and I was like, "Yeah, I think it's time. I'm tired of this exhaustion. I'm tired of all these things that I was experiencing. I've been experiencing multiple times." And so, a few months later, I sat in my first psilocybin ceremony, and wow, my mind just went. It went open to the point of like what I experienced in that first moment was the default mode network or the prefrontal cortex of your mind. This is where all the chatter is going on, and it's the patterns, it's all these things that quiets down. And once I got into the medicine, that quieted down. I was able to see through what they call the veil, and really, I was starting to see and understand why I was doing and feeling the way that I was feeling. It's like, wow, like, okay, I grew up in a chaotic home environment. I felt like I was always walking on eggshells as a child. And so I was always in this protective mode to protect my emotions because others around me weren't able to regulate their own emotions. So
Mm,
I always held mine back. So what that did, that moved me into a pattern state of always always working in companies that were chaotic environments, and I was
mm,
brought in to optimize, grow, or evolve the operations because they were in this chaotic moment. So I was coming in and creating a safe boundary around me, thereby evolving the way the company was operating, because I would
mm.
go in and change the processes and evolve the operations and a number of things, leading by way of sales. And that's why I was always getting exhausted because I was burning myself out
Right.
all the time. And so I saw this in medicine, and then I started doing multiple psilocybin ceremonies thereafter, and I've made so many shifts in my life as a result that I decided to go to school in Portland, Oregon, um, to a school called Intertrek, and Intertrek is the first state licensed, governmental licensed facilitation school for psychedelics, specifically psilocybin. So I went there and became certified so I
Wow.
could bring this into my practice and support others on their journey for personal transformation or self-development and growth. So my practice is kind of split in two. So I do executive coaching on one hand, and then on the other hand, I'll facilitate one-on-one and group ceremonies. And then when it's relevant and invited in, I can and will facilitate executive leadership on
Mm,
psilocybin journeys.
mm,
Not all of them, ones that are willing to be curious and explore
mm.
how that supports them in their day-to-day experience. Really, my goal with combining the two is to support leaders in becoming more heart conscious, more aware of their patterns, and become more compassionate in the work
Right.
environment. Because what they don't understand sometimes is that what they're feeling and what they're experiencing, they're projecting outwardly, and it is impacting everybody else in and around and under
Right.
them.
Right.
Right.
So
So,
there's a lot to unpack. I'll usually stop my guests and like, hold on, let's talk about that. But I wanted to let you finish there. But I have to go back.
mm,
So there's a few things I really want to touch about. One, you used the word compassion.
mhm.
Is compassion the same as being nice?
No, I think they're very different. Nice is being, I feel like nice in some way is a mask. It's a mask of interacting with an individual to elicit something from them. So I'm going to be nice to you so you can give me a ride home. I'm going to using a very simple kind of example. Whereas I see compassionate to be really relational, connective, understanding them, holding space for them, with them, connecting with them as a real human, and understanding that we're all going through stuff. We're all going through similar stuff to varying degrees every single second of the day. So that to me is the difference between being just nice or being compassionate.
Yeah. I love that. I use the word kind, but I
Mhm.
love the word compassionate too. But I feel strongly that neither one of those words, compassionate or kind, is the same as nice. And I think we see a lot of niceties without kind of true compassion. So I appreciate your comment very much.
Yeah, I feel like there's expectations attached to niceties
Yeah,
is really what I feel in a lot of ways.
yeah. And then you talk about this this almost contradiction between the order and the chaos, and then the shift between the two, which can be quite stressful for
Mhm.
everyone. Um, what's the philosophy here? Is it are startups just chaotic in their nature, and that at some stage they need to become less chaotic? Is chaos all bad? Is there a necessary evil in chaos? What should we aspire to here? And does it matter which stage of the startup we're in? Jeremy is not getting easy questions today.
No, 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 no. You know, I there may be some rarities out there, but I'd like to say, and I will say that most startups are chaotic
Yeah.
by nature, right? Because you're coming into an environment, I have an idea, okay, how do I move this idea forward? How do I find money?
Yeah.
Okay, do how like you what you're doing in this startup environment is that you are figuring it out as you go. You are patterning things as you move forward, and then you're realizing, that's the wrong pattern. Pull it back, go a different direction. So you're iterating real time all the time. From ideation through up to series A, B. All right. And it's a much more chaotic because you're not really sure what is that next right step. Is it A or is it D or is it G? I'm not really sure. And so you're iterating, testing, moving. So it by nature, it is chaotic. And it's not chaos in a negative way. It's you're just trying to figure it out every single step of the way, every single day. And at one point, it'll shift.
Yeah.
You'll find that product market fit. You'll find that there's interest. You'll find the right ICP or targeted customer. You'll find those. And then when you find those, then that pattern starts to expand and evolve. And then it just starts shifting and moving that direction. So yeah, it just takes time. It just takes time as you're working through that process. So
Have you noticed that there's kind of different people that are better associated with the kind of chaotic phase, pre kind of things
yeah.
settle down, and then there are better people that are better associated with that latter stage? Do you need to
Mhm.
change your team when this shift happens? Like, how do you kind of think through this as a life cycle? Think of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Really from early stage to A or even B, somewhere in there. If you in an early stage as a founder who's inexperienced and is thinking, "Oh, I need this person to be in sales," and you look at a salesperson and say, "Oh, they were, top seller at Cisco for this SaaS platform, or they were here, or they went to Harvard and they have an MBA there." You're
Yeah,
enamored with what you see on a resume,
yeah,
and you bring that person in, and they fail miserably in the next 6 months. Well,
yeah,
that person didn't fail. It was a misalignment on the hiring because that person is more likely better aligned for a more corporate role, say
yeah,
Series B plus, where everything is kind of settled down. There's patterns, there's structure, there's processes. That person can go in and probably do a hell of a bang up job, an amazing
Yeah.
job. So there really is a difference in personality type, where you need somebody that's much more scrappy,
Yeah.
who's willing to get in, roll up their sleeves, that can operate fast, think fast, can do 10 different things at once. So you really, as a founder, that's something that really needs to be considered is the DNA type of the person you're bringing in,
Yeah.
not just what their resume says, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I had a coaching call this week, or excuse me, last week on Thursday with a person, and he's very scrappy by nature.
Yeah.
And he was telling me, look, I'm applying at BCG and PwC and others big consulting firms. And I said, are you getting interviews? He said, well, I'm getting an interview, but I'm not really going past the first 30 minutes with them.
Yeah.
And I said to him, I said, why? And he said, no. I said, look, you don't have the DNA that they're looking for. You're
Yeah.
scrappy. They're looking for somebody that's much more polished and buttoned up. And not that you can't do that job. I'm sure you can do that job well, but they're not ever going to give you the opportunity to even step into that. So I feel like you should be focusing on this direction
Yeah.
to this type of environment where they're looking for somebody that is scrappy like you, that moves and gets things done immediately. So refocus yourself in that. So
In
yes.
many ways, I would argue not getting a job because there's a cultural misalignment is dodging a bullet, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
if he or she gets a job where there's just this fundamental misalignment, right? You're scrappy, you want to get shit done, but the corporation isn't like, no, don't step on my toes, and everybody has clear responsibilities. And you can't say the truth, God forbid, because we have to be
Mhm.
very structured and show respect and all the big things that happen in big corporations. You'll be miserable there if you're scrappy. Because if you're
Yeah,
scrappy, you just
absolutely.
want to fix stuff. Like that's what you want to
Yeah.
do. And if you're like, don't step on my toes kind of person, then people ask you to do like A and then tomorrow B, which is the diametric opposite. You're going to be like, that's not my job.
Yeah.
Your manager won't be happy with you, and you won't be happy with the. So I think there's something here. Have you figured out this holy grail of how to know? Because we always like we hire people based, as you said, it's Stanford, it's accomplishments, it's all these things. But have you figured out how to interview to figure out if there is cultural alignment? Because we kind of like all brag that we have great cultures, and as if like the culture is either good or bad. But really, I think that's not true. There's different cultures. And if you're not a cultural alignment, it could be that we're not the cultural alignment to you. Like it's not,
Mhm.
it's right. There's a symmetry to it. So how do you figure that out? Like, how do you make cultural issues when you think about hiring salespeople? How do you prevent those?
Yeah, you have to look, the interview process is a challenging process and one that becomes very what's the word I'm looking for? Subjective.
Mm,
It's very subjective because it's like, oh, do I like that person? Oh, we're having
yes.
a good conversation.
Yes.
Oh, yeah,
Thank
I
you.
think he would do. Yeah, like so it's very this is what begins to happen in a lot of places that you do interviews at. So, what I've done in some places is that, I've done two specific things is of course, yeah, we'll have that conversation to feel energy and what that is like.
Mm,
But the other thing too is that I had in two instances, I had put in place a psychological profile test.
mm,
I worked with a consultant to help map out not just their psychological profile, but of the organization and mine as the sales leader.
yeah.
And then they would take that test and then we would look at the mapping and see how things align.
Mm,
That's one piece that we put in place. But the other thing too is that I also give them a take-home test. And I'm like, okay, this is the product, this is the service, this is our target, this is where this is blah blah blah. Put a plan together. What
mm,
is your next 30, 60, 90 days? I want to see what that is. And I'm not going to give you input. I want to see how resourceful you are on your own and what experience that you have that you can bring to bear to help us solve these problems. Right. And, because if when I didn't do that, then they're coming in, then we feel like we have to tell them what to do.
yeah.
They should be doing this. So, as in an
Yeah.
earlier stage company, we want them to bring their experience and we want them to contribute assuming they have operated at a very similar level, and they'll usually come in as a big contributor in that fashion, right?
Yeah.
So
That's, yeah, I ask this question a lot. I don't have a great answer. What I do is I share the good, the bad, and the ugly.
mhm.
And I say, here's what's terrible about this company.
Yeah,
And if they understand kind of the roughness of the culture and they're okay with it, then that's the first step in building trust, because like, look, we're not perfect. This aspect of the culture we might need to change, but this
mhm.
aspect of the culture is not like ideal for everyone, and it might not change anytime soon. So I need to know that you're okay with it. And the responses that I get from candidates are crazy good, because they're not used to getting that level of
Yeah,
transparency and honesty. And then they're coming with a mindset of like, okay, I understand this. Can I be successful in an environment that has these glitches or not? And what I tell people a little bit as a kind of a soft landing, I'm like, look, I'm telling you the truth. What's going to happen in your other 9 interviews or whatever, they're just not going to tell you, and you're not going to know,
yeah,
so it's going to be a surprise. But I'm
yeah,
telling you, this is how we're struggling, and we need to make sure that you can be successful in this environment, and nobody is perfect.
yeah. I'm really glad you brought that up, Ari, and you reminded me that that's part of the process as well. Is that when I do interview, I interview to make them run away,
Yes, I love
right?
that. Thank you. Tell us more. I do that too.
Yeah, like, and it's about being real,
Yes.
right? It's the same thing when we date somebody. So many times you date, you're putting on this mask and you're
Yes.
pretending to be this, and within 6 months,
Yeah.
they're going to figure out that that's not
That's
exactly
not.
what
Yeah.
you sold them in the beginning. So let's just get to the chase,
Yeah.
right? This is the way it is. This is what's happening, and you're going to come in, you're going to experience it anyway. So this is where integrity and authenticity and transparency come into play. That's a huge part of that process.
Yeah.
And if you're not practicing that, well, then shame on you, right? Because
Yeah.
you're trying to convince them to work with you, and you know that there's shit going on.
Yeah.
But just be open about it. And
Yeah.
whoever the right person is, they will align, and things will come together.
Yeah. It's, I don't know. I just this is incredibly frustrating that we're basically lying to the candidates.
Yeah,
If you don't believe in this philosophy that you and I are talking about, you're basically lying to the candidates, and that is so detrimental to you, to the candidates, right? They're taking a job that maybe they'll fail at, so this is going to affect their mortgage, their family. It's going to affect your company as the hiring manager, because you're going to waste 3-4 months of salary. You're not going to grow, you're not going to sell.
yeah,
Like, it's just a bad idea is what it is. Like,
yeah.
just put
And
it on the table.
you gotta wonder, like, why is a hiring manager or whoever it is, why are they holding things back?
Yeah.
Because they're likely gonna have to redo the whole process. They're
Yeah.
wasting time and
Yeah.
resources, and it's like, so why are they doing that? Is it because they're just trying to show that they've got their pipeline moving, that they're meeting numbers, that like they in themselves have to do some self-exploration around the process,
Yeah. So
you
let's
know?
go to the dark side.
Hmm.
Let's talk about toxic managers. This is something that just blows my mind every time I see it. I've seen this happen multiple times, where a manager just fires people one after the other. So you have this kind of this rolling, hot chair of people that come in and go away, and they get fired pretty quickly. But statistically, it's a lot of people. So we see these managers that are losing people a lot, but then their managers, right, the managers doesn't seem to ever ask themselves the question, why are we losing so many people on this team? And then there's a few other things that show up. We notice that these type of toxic managers, they don't want their team to ever talk to their managers or anybody senior, so they're kind of trying to control the communication.
Yeah.
We see patterns where basically the same kind of patterns that we see in dating, right? We see gaslighting, right? Where you're trying to convince, the manager is trying to convince their employees that one thing is actually another. If they do a good job, they'll tell them, no, this is actually, you messed up. So they completely focus only on the negative. Um, these toxic behaviors are so dangerous, especially for managers, because they are going to impact almost the whole organization, right?
Absolutely.
In many cases. How do you kind of think about this? Have you seen these toxic behaviors? What do you do when you kind of figure out, like, holy cow, we have a toxic manager?
Oh, you just you know, these are challenging situations, right? Like if there's a toxic manager, you know, they themselves are dealing with so much shit personally that they're just trying to hold it all together, right?
Yeah.
So this could be an imposter syndrome experience. Like they know that they're not capable of doing that job, so they're going to just start churning through to find who's going to help me do my job so I look good and you're not good enough, so you get out, go to another one. So there's so much stuff that's going on that needs to be unpacked in an experience. But if their manager is not questioning it, well, shame on them for not being a good manager,
Yeah.
right? Because if they're not questioning it, that means that they're really not sure. So see what happens is it just trickles down,
Yeah.
right? So that manager is hiring somebody in their image, and then you get that next one who is hiring in their image. So it just
Yeah.
becomes a process of just complete disarray and breakdown,
Yeah.
right? And then this is why the door keeps revolving, and people are just going out because it's because they're trying. It's there's so much
Mm.
they're trying to cover up. They're not being honest.
Yeah.
They're agreeing to things with upper management that they really shouldn't be agreed with. That they're not having the right conversation with upper management to talk about the challenges they're having. So there's a lot of there are a lot of holding and hiding and covering up a
Yeah.
lot of stuff in that process.
Yeah.
This just
I
becomes very
see.
toxic.
I see a lot of like differences in communication. So one of the best ways to find out if your manager is toxic is if the way
Mhm.
they communicate downwards is
Yeah.
completely different than the way they communicate upwards. So these toxic managers will basically completely suck up to their managers, but then they'll be very critical of their team and employees. You see these toxic managers taking credit from their employees and then
Yep.
blaming them for things that go wrong. Um, you said something really interesting at the beginning. I want to latch onto that for a second and explore a little bit more. You said that sometimes or many times, I don't know, I'll let you elaborate. These toxic managers are actually incompetent. Is
Mhm.
that a fair? Did I read that correctly? They're
Yeah.
weak in some way.
Yeah. Yeah, they're weak in some way, and I use the phrase imposter syndrome, where some people look at we all have imposter syndrome to varying degrees. Of course. I'm sure you had it when you first started this podcast. Like, oh my God, people gonna listen to me. What am I gonna do? Like, but you work through this over time because you
Yeah.
have the capacity and the ability to move through that. Some don't. Some get bound up by that,
Yeah.
and then as a result, they're just starting to make stuff up around them to support the pain that they're feeling internally of I am not good enough. I don't know if I can do this, and
Yeah.
so if they believe that they can't do it and they're creating things that aren't right, well then they're just it's just kind of it spreads. So they're
Yeah.
incompetent, right? And and whatever they're communicating up, they've said it in a way to make themselves look
Look
good.
good.
So they're
Yeah.
buying time. All they're doing is buying time
Yep.
in the process.
Yeah.
That's what's happening if they're not
Yeah.
able to work through their own stuff, or if they're not able to have a vulnerable, open conversation to their manager and say, "Look, I'm having a challenge." It's because people don't want to ask for help because they will believe that they'll get fired or pushed out. And yeah, maybe you will. Maybe you're not right for the environment, or
Yeah.
or whatnot, or maybe you've been overhired in that role.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff that goes on in that
Yeah.
process.
I don't know how to solve this. I mean, I just see the senior executives just let these toxic managers be. Many times they're VPs, so they're underneath the C-suite, but they have a whole bunch of people they're managing. And it's I just don't know how to solve it. I don't have good advice. The only advice I think I have is to employees to kind of just detect these toxic managers up early and not take the job.
Yeah.
If you're lucky enough to be able to avoid a toxic manager, we not everybody
Yeah.
can.
Yeah,
Um,
and the unfortunate thing is that it won't be until after you take the job mostly
yeah.
that you will discover this, right? Because what I find is that in the interview process, a lot of people don't ever understand that the interview process is a two-way experience.
Yeah.
It's not them just interviewing you, it's you
Yeah.
interviewing them.
Wonderful.
And if you don't have that mindset going into it, you're just sitting there responding to whatever they ask you.
Yes.
And if you take the role, then you find out in a month or two, holy shit,
Yeah.
What did I do? And then what'll end up happening is that person will stay in the role because they're getting money, and then maybe they
Yeah.
have a title, whatever it is, and they just complain every single day for days and days
Yeah.
and months until they're completely fed up a year later if they make it that long, and then they're completely miserable,
Yeah.
right?
I had this one toxic manager in the interview process. He confirmed with the candidate, "Oh, you understand you work for me, and you are, you need to do what I say." Was slightly differently verbalized, but that need to exert control,
Control to
right,
start.
and dominance at
Yeah.
the very beginning, like
Yeah.
that was a red flag.
Yeah.
And then, so I would argue that these toxic people have red flags that you can kind
Mhm.
of notice early on, because the price for interacting with them and actually working for them is very high. So yeah, I love your advice. Like, you are interviewing the manager as much as they are.
Yeah.
So there are things that you can ask to kind of unmask them a little bit and figure out what they feel comfortable with. And maybe another piece of advice that I would give is, look at people who have worked for that manager before. And like,
Mm.
it's very common to do a reference check on an employee, but you can do
Yeah.
a reference check on a manager. So here's what I
Yeah.
do. I will look for the people who worked for that manager again before. And here's this specific manager, very, very toxic. I see a lady who worked for him before. She had to take an 8-month like break after working for
Mental
him.
health break.
Mental health break. Yeah. So he basically messed her up so badly that she was like, I don't know what's happening here. That's how damaging these toxic people are.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would caution everybody to have this top of mind. You don't want to work for terrible managers.
Yeah, and and I feel horrible for that gal that had that experience, but also ask yourself why you're staying there as long as you
Yeah,
are,
yeah,
right? Like at some point, if you don't make the change, you're just enabling that
yeah.
relationship.
I
It's a codependent relationship because
it's
of money, because of fear,
yeah, that's
because
right.
of so
It's really tough. I have a good friend who's in a
yeah,
situation like this right now, and she is basically like, she's making good money, and her boss basically is horrid, like all the things that I talked about before. But yeah, there's the money, and then there's the fear of change, and then there's the fear of like, how hard will it be to find a new job, and
yeah,
then
of
there's like
course.
all the relationships I've built. There's so many, the barriers to entrance, to exit, we call it exit, right?
Mhm.
They kind of mount up, so it becomes really difficult. um,
And then one thing that we don't it takes a while for us to understand, fear does not exist. Fear is a construct of our own mind. We're creating that fear. We're telling ourselves it's going to be hard. Oh, I can't do this. I'm not going to find that. Well, what if? What if you do find that? What if you meet somebody tomorrow that like
yeah.
we have to reframe things, right? And work through that. Otherwise, we get consumed by our own fear that we create within ourselves, and then that prevents us from doing what we know is right.
Yeah. So what Jeremy shared with you right now, reframing, is, I would say, like, it's hard to rate social psychology, but I would say that if I had to rate social psychology, that tactic, reframing, is probably one of the most powerful and also dangerous tactics. I'll put a small little caveat here. The reason why the Challenger, I think it was, exploded. Sure, it was the O-ring, but what happened in the background there is that one manager said, basically used framing on their engineers, and like he said, don't think like an engineer, think like a manager. They cleared the O-ring, the shuttle exploded. Really, really horrific story. Framing was at the heart of the problem there. But if you use framing positively, it can be as incredibly powerful to
Mhm.
change and remove limiting beliefs. So we won't go into that today because we're totally out of time, but I really appreciated that comment that you made. Um, Jeremy, this has been so delightful. We are so over time because this has been so much fun. We have only one question that we ask every single guest on the show,
Mhm.
and it's a hard one. If you had to go back to the most difficult moment in your life, be it a month ago or 20 years ago, whatever it might be, what advice would you have given to yourself?
Mm. ask for help. Ask for help from somebody else and not feel like I have to do it on my own and have to figure it out alone. That simple thing caused me to go through life for a period of time in work environments doing everything myself and feel like there was nobody else good enough or like so I feel like if I were to go back it would be to ask for help in a challenging moment. Yeah.
Jeremy, thank you so much for joining the show today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Had a wonderful time.